Hello and welcome to the GreenTruth podcast by TiiQu, your go-to destination for insightful conversations on sustainability. We're committed to delving into diverse perspectives on environmental issues, guided by the belief that embracing truth empowers us to create a better world for generations to come. I'm Chantal Kerr-Shepherd, your host, and this week I'm joined by Philip Airhorn, co-founder of the Great Bubble Barrier. Philip is an ocean enthusiast and he's an innovator dedicated to tackling the pervasive problem of plastic pollution in our waterways. In today's episode, we'll delve into the fascinating story of how the Great Bubble Barrier came to be, and we'll explore how this innovative technology works, the challenges Philip and his team overcame to bring it to life, and their vision for a future with cleaner, healthier waterways. So, welcome to the podcast, Philip. For our listeners who are unfamiliar with you and the Great Bubble Barrier, could you start by telling us a bit about yourself and what sparked your passion for ocean conservation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having me. Um, my passion for the ocean is something that I don't question it anymore or try to explain where it's coming from. It's something I've always had, and I've come to terms that there's no specific explanation. For me, it's pretty obvious why, or let's say it's rather confusing for me if people are not in love with the ocean. I, I understand it can be intimidating, and it can be at times even frightening if you, I don't know, in very high waves. But all in all, for me, it has a very deep fascination sensation to me. It's all very logical that it's where we all come from. And it's such a beautiful place as well. And that for me is also the reason why I wish to protect and preserve it. I think everyone will understand that they would like to protect what they love, and the ocean is a big part of that for me. So I've always wanted to do something with the ocean. When I was very young, I wanted to become a diver, and once I grew a bit older, it was marine biology. And eventually, I had a bit of I wouldn't say a turning point, but a moment that kind of shaped the direction that I wanted to take with this. And that was an article that I read about a marine biologist who wrote about that most of his life he spent observing the destruction of our oceans. And that hit me pretty hard. And I still love marine biology, and I'm still jealous of every marine biologist in this world. Um, but it was just for me that moment that I thought, geez, I don't want to be an observer. I want to be actively working on solutions, on alternatives, on stopping that destruction. And so that put me on that path to kind of explore something more technical, more in the world where the destruction is happening, trying to understand that world and their language, try to change it from within.
So, where did that journey take you? So, you scrapped off marine biology. Where do you go to solve problems that are destroying our ocean?
Yeah. The I'll spare you the full story, but basically, marine industry was what I was looking at. Starting definitely also with oil and oil exploration and everything that goes around it, and pretty quickly also ended up with the shipping industry, heavily unregulated still to this day. There's some regulations, but it's international waters. There's no official laws that anyone in those waters has to adhere to. So still today, basically a lot of ships are burning crude oil. So just the way almost I'm going to say almost the way it comes out of the earth, it is burned. And we have ways of dealing with that. Luckily by now, so the International Maritime Organization is working on making sure that ships have less and less emission. But it's such a multitude of issues that are surrounded in the marine industry. And it's definitely something that is a conventional, let's say, career field. So I looked a little bit around me at that time, didn't want to move away too far from home for studying. So I found a study at the Technical University in Berlin, which is naval architecture and ocean engineering. And that at the time for me just seemed very interesting in that direction, that I thought, okay, that might be something that I can spend my time on.
That is still very niche. And to me, that's quite far removed from plastic pollution and from how you got to the Great Bubble Barrier. Where did you go after that? How did you use your naval architecture and engineering
Yeah.
to change the way the oceans are being used?
Um, I agree. I'm pretty far away from that nowadays, and I never really worked in that field, I have to say, because basically my thesis was already about capturing plastics with air bubbles, and um, literally the day after I handed in my thesis, I moved to the Netherlands to join my co-founders, just jumping ahead in the storyline a little bit. So definitely, I took that knowledge and what I learned in that study, and I'm still using it today. But where how it led me to this was basically that while I was studying, I was still following everything else that I was so in love with, which any sort of magazine, documentaries about the ocean, anything I could get my hands on was interesting. And plastic pollution is definitely one that, you know, comes up fairly quickly. And I'm also I love surfing and diving, and definitely people from those hobbies, they are quite familiar with the issue because it's nothing new in that sense. It's fairly new in the mainstream media, especially at that time while I was studying. It was just gaining more and more attention. The ocean cleanup had just gotten a lot of attention, and so that brought me a little bit towards plastic and plastic in our oceans. And because of my study and looking at also ship and the shipping industry, um, I was thinking, yeah, if we want to stop the amount of plastic in our oceans, surely, of course, we have to try to clean it up in the oceans, but wouldn't it be better to try to stop it from ever reaching the ocean? Um, but also very quickly, I realized that we wouldn't really win the fight against the shipping industry. You know, it's an important economic driver, and if you want to put a big net in the river to stop plastic, um, you will probably get stopped by the shipping industry very quickly, or not even by them. I mean, knowing what we know today, we just wouldn't get a permit, and it would never happen. And so that led me to explore different ideas of how we could have something in rivers that would be compatible with shipping.
So, where did the idea for bubbles come from?
Yeah. Um, I've heard other concepts that were not with bubbles, very different. But I was fortunate enough that my university sent me to Australia for half a year, so one semester, and I was studying environmental engineering in Australia. And as part of that, we did an excursion to a wastewater treatment plant. And quite literally, the wastewater that's coming to those facilities gets aerated. So you have to imagine a big basin, kind of like a very disgusting jacuzzi that you shouldn't jump into.
Oh,
Um,
the image, great.
so there's air everywhere, so it's bubbling, and it's to support certain bacterial growth to clean the water. I had to break down organic matter, um, but it also contained all the plastic that people had flushed down the toilet. And plastic that was flushed down the toilet was collecting in one corner of that basin. And that was, for me, first time that spark that said, oh, yeah, right. Bubbles, when they rise to the surface and eventually they pop, they create a water flow. And what if I could maybe use that more directed so that I can catch plastics? It wasn't immediately, but I was quite on location thinking about, maybe I can use that to redirect plastic. And so I took that idea and started working on it.
And did you initially start working on it on your own? Because I know you've got co-founders in it. And
Yeah,
if you didn't, how did you find them?
yes. And that's another thing I don't really question anymore because it's almost a bit scary because ultimately my co-founders were having the same idea and we tracked it back to almost the exact month of the year. And that's three young women from the Netherlands at the time. Well, they're still, I would still describe them as young women from the Netherlands, but they were at a bar discussing as well various environmental issues, of which one was plastic pollution. Also, them at the time they were working as sailing instructors together, and also on the Dutch lakes you see plastic everywhere. And it was literally the air bubbles in the beer that sparked the idea of, hey, maybe we can use air bubbles to redirect plastic.
Wow.
So yeah, different moments, not in time, but different reason why this idea came up. And long story short, there wasn't, like, neither of us had put anything out there. We didn't know of each other. But once I had started working on that idea and I had told friends and family about it, I just set up a very simple one-pager website to keep people updated. And then someone I had gone to school with contacted me saying, hey, Philip, I found this video on YouTube, and I think it's people doing exactly the same thing that you are doing.
Amazing.
Yes. At the time, I was, to be very honest, thinking, you probably don't know what I'm doing. So I thought, there's no chance someone is doing exactly what I'm doing. But he sent me a video with 120 views. That's not something that pops up regularly in your algorithm, right? Only if you're really deep into YouTube and it's like 1 a.m. and you start to find odd videos.
The black hole of the internet, yeah.
Yeah. Normally where you don't want to end up. And it was Anna Marike, one of my co-founders, pitching the idea of a bubble curtain as part of a contest that they had joined. And that's why anything was on the internet. I was baffled. And I was thinking, this is exactly what I was working on. It's crazy that someone came up with the same idea. And to be fair, this is not an entirely new idea. Bubble curtains have been used in the past, actually for a very long time. But no one had really thought about applying it to a river, so a flowing body of water, and to redirect plastic to a specific location. And the only thing I could find about them was Saskia, one of the other three original co-founders, personal Instagram account where she had uploaded a short video. And that's where I reached out. And we started talking, and we relatively quickly identified that we had the same mindset, the same mission and vision in mind where we could take this. And again, long story short, I ended up moving to the Netherlands the day after I handed in my thesis.
Wow. And then you started work. How did those first initial concepts come to life? Did you receive funding to make it happen, or were you testing in labs? Did you have access to space to test your idea, or did you
Yeah.
have to get more people on board?
Yeah. I mean, so the thesis for me, that's a whole story in itself, but I was already testing in the field, basically. And I was lucky enough that a company had supported me with some of the equipment, and the university had given me the freedom to basically do whatever I wanted. And the video that I just mentioned, that from the contest, that was the first initial big funding, and that was with the Dutch National Water Authority. If you want to try to practice your Dutch, called the Rijkswaterstaat, and it was the Plastic-Free Rivers Makeathon, with a price of €100,000, which we could use to set up our first pilot test, basically, including some lab testing. And so while I was still busy in Berlin, they had already done the lab tests. I've done my tests. We combined the results, and then I joined them basically just before the start of the big open water pilot in 2017.
Incredible. So great minds literally came and met, and you came up with a wonderful concept. So can you describe it? It's kind of easy in my head to visualize a wall of bubbles, but how does it work specifically? You said it takes the plastic and directs it off somewhere else. Can you just describe it in the most visual way you can so that our listeners can understand the process?
Yeah, I'll do my best. So the wall of bubbles, or the bubble curtain itself, the way we create that is that we have a perforated rubber tube that we place at a specific angle on the bottom of the waterway. And then we have an electric compressor that pumps air through that hose. And then through those perforations, we have all like millions of tiny bubbles to start to rise to the surface, as you know from a jacuzzi, but not everywhere. But a specific line, that angle that we calculate and then deploy in the river. And once they reach the surface, the air goes back into the air. But while they were traveling to the surface, they pulled water with them. So they are creating a water flow towards the surface. And it breaks up at the surface and goes left and right from that center line of bubbles. And if we didn't have the river flow by itself, all we would do is basically just push it to the side. But because the river itself, the flow of the river is also pushing against that line of bubbles, it's dragging it along that line and then towards one side of the river, where we then have our collection system where the trash is retained and then removed from the water.
So can this only be used in river situations? Because you mentioned you did some testing in open water as well. How does that affect the use of the barrier?
Yeah. So for me, open water is a river. um, but we mainly need some sort of flow from the river or canal itself. So if you were to put it in a lake, we could do that. It would push plastic to the side, but it wouldn't really guide it towards a specific location. And that's kind of what we want to avoid. We want to avoid there's like a big carpet of trash in front of the curtain. And so we're utilizing the natural flow of the river, and to have then the trash pushed along that line to one dedicated collection area.
And does it collect other items that aren't plastic as well? How
Yes.
does it isolate plastic?
Yeah, we're not isolating plastic, right? So we are, of course, calculating the amount of air that we need to push floating debris and submerged debris to the side. That's something I should have mentioned. The advantage of using air bubbles is not only that we don't interfere with ship traffic or wildlife, but also that we can lift plastic to the surface that's floating underwater. But we also collect other stuff, right? In rivers, there's leaves, branches, and also all sorts of material. There's some data you can also find on our website with our impact study on Amsterdam, what we're collecting, and it's quite literally anything that humans use. So it goes from your usual suspects of single-use plastic packaging, um, bike helmets, tires, windsurf boards,
Crikey.
old TVs. Every year we get Christmas trees as well.
Old TVs. It's strong enough to pick up a TV.
Well, it doesn't lift it up from from the bottom, right? And you have to think of old TVs, the tube
Okay.
televisions, because they're hollow and they float. So we collect those. But in Amsterdam the other day, we had a truck car tire with the rim. So it yeah. And the weirdest part I think we found so far that I know of were the third dentures from someone. Um, I hope they lost them and that the rest of that person is not somewhere in that canal.
Yeah, if not, the bubble barrier probably stop them. Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, we've come close to that situation,
Oh,
and
wow.
luckily so far, not yeah, yeah, different topic, but yeah, we're basically collecting river debris, and not just plastic.
And where does the slightly off topic, but where does all that debris go afterwards? Is there a sorting facility you take it to that you identify near the rivers you're working on?
Yeah, right. Basically, so we are the way we're working is we're working with mainly municipalities, cities, and water authorities, and we are doing the whole design, engineering, planning for the bubble barrier, and then we also place it in the river. Often we're also then involved with the operation and maintenance and some monitoring and additional work, but we deliver the bubble barrier itself as a product, so the city will own it. And with that, they also own all the material that the system is collecting. We usually help them and advise what to do best with the collected material. And in the cases in the Netherlands, it all goes to waste sorting facilities, where some of the plastic is recovered, mainly the larger pieces, hard plastic, and then everything else will go to incineration, which is waste to energy. So it gets burned, and then with the steam, you generate energy. But of course, not everywhere we have that opportunity. So we're also looking at other projects that are coming up where we don't have such, let's say, advanced waste management facilities, and we have to look at other solutions.
Are there any barriers to use in terms of wildlife, like the migration of fish upstream? does it affect the ecosystem that's existing underneath
Yeah,
the bubble barrier that's happening?
that has been a very important aspect since the beginning for us. What we're doing, and the goal is to be overall a positive impact on the ecosystem, right? It's not just about extracting plastic, no matter what. It's about improving life underwater. And bubble curtains have been used in the past to try to deter fish from certain locations. So there's a lot of cooling water intakes where they try to use air bubbles to stop fish from entering or other wildlife, um, all with very little success. They usually get away with it and say, "Yeah, we're trying to mitigate and we're doing a little bit," um, but not really successfully. And very at the very beginning, a lot of the studies were coming from the US, especially around the Great Lakes. They have an invasive fish, which is the Asian carp, which is terrible for the local ecosystem. So they've been trying to stop them from spreading throughout um, the Great Lakes, and they are using something that the local authorities refer to as disco barriers, because they're using air bubbles, stroboscope light, sound, and electricity all at the same time. So there you have your disco barrier.
A nightmare for anybody with oversensitive.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's probably as much as you can trigger anyone. Yeah, so definitely there's no swimming in those areas. Um, but also those systems have limited success. So we were quite confident that it wouldn't really stop fish. But then again, there's fish and there's fish, right? There's different species. And we have just actually finished a big research project, independently done, at one of our systems in the Netherlands, where they looked at glass eel. That's the very young stage of eels, which are migrating from the ocean inland. If anyone's listening, if you want to look into how eel reproduce, go down that rabbit hole. Very fascinating. I'll leave it at that. But basically, they looked at the juvenile and also the later stage of those fish to try to see if we have any impact with our specific bubble curtain. So we don't have a disco barrier. We have a singular line with relatively low flow of air, not like all the other systems that have been used in the past with a lot more air, multiple roads after each other, electricity, all the shebang. And it's not published yet, and it will be very soon published. But I can tell you so much that it looks very positive, and it will probably help us further rule out any sort of negative impacts.
So I guess that then plays into how do you sell this in to cities that need it? How have you scaled this idea from something that clearly is a force for good within rivers, and you're working to make sure that it doesn't harm the wildlife? How have you tackled areas where it's clearly in use? Because it's got to be an investment.
Yes, absolutely. Um, so I already mentioned a little bit. We're mainly working with municipalities, cities, water authorities, um, the official government bodies who are normally responsible for water quality. Um, However, officially, plastics have yet to make their way into water quality. While we all agree that if you would see a body of water or it's anything full of plastic, you would say water quality is probably bad. But if we look at official indicators for water quality, it's not included yet, which means most cities or authorities are not obligated to do anything against it. And it's definitely something that still holds back not only our technology, but a lot of other measures on land, in the water, everywhere, from doing more about preventing plastic pollution ending up in our waters. So we're mainly working with cities that are pioneers themselves, who take more responsibility than they should or need. Not that
Yeah.
they should actually take more responsibility, but then
Yes,
they need
agreed.
officially. Yeah. Um, and it can be as simple as they already know that this is coming, right? Often there is also there's scientists working at cities and governments who know it's just a matter of time until we have to do something about it. And at the end of the day, they're humans, they're people just like you and me, and they also feel this is wrong and they want to do something about it, and they have the power to do that. And so with these people, we work together to deploy those systems. And yes, it costs money. It's an additional spending, and it's not like you can take the plastic, recycle it, make new products, and run a profit. Unfortunately, that doesn't really work.
So it's a social responsibility that we need to have faith that these cities have.
In a way, yeah. Yeah.
Is there anybody else that you're working with, any other organisations or researchers and policymakers, to try and bring this to the forefront of a city's needs, for example?
Yes, we try to work with everyone. We think collaboration is the only way to tackle such a problem is with collaboration. We can definitely not solve this by ourselves, and we also think that uh, you have more success when you work with a bigger, diverse group of people and organizations. We If we look at a project base, so per project, the first thing we also do is identify not only the official authorities that have a say about permits and regulations, but the people that have an interest in the river. And that can be local nonprofit organizations, um, or other citizen initiatives who just do cleanups along the beaches or the rivers. It can be rowing associations, fishing associations, anyone who kind of uses the river as their backyard. And there's a lot of people everywhere. Every river you have, there's people that love the river. So we try to identify them early on and to speak to them and to work with them, because we also think, yeah, even if we just place a system, there'll be an official owner and the operator who runs the system. But there needs to be community ownership. There needs to be sense of that this is part of the community. That's what they own, and to use also their knowledge of the area and the river. And then, as you mentioned, going forward, working on data collection and monitoring what each system is collecting, so that we can provide that information to not only scientists and academia, but also to raise more awareness for it and to give hard facts and arguments, so that we can, pressure our politicians and policymakers to take more action on land and upstream, so that hopefully in the future we get less and less in each bubble barrier, less plastic. And that might be a bit of a paradox for what we do, but ultimately we want to put ourselves out of a job. We want to reduce the amount of trash that we get to collect. But yeah, also think that's not something that we can achieve tomorrow or next year. That will take some time.
It's a goal for a lot of people working in sustainability. I hear it over and over again. We shouldn't exist. We
Yeah,
shouldn't have to solve these problems because
correct,
we created them in the first place, and all this
correct,
waste shouldn't be there.
right. And also, we never started this because we thought this is good business. If we only looked at that, we shouldn't have never started this.
Yeah.
And yeah,
We've got to have good people doing good things in the world, and often it doesn't pay money to do it. But we can go to bed feeling better about ourselves and leaving the world in a better place, which I think is a great thing to do.
right, right. But I also think I and maybe also comes about how I'm like trying to be just radically optimistic. I do think we can change this, and I do think we need to start somewhere. And I definitely did. Like I said, we didn't start this because it's a good career that pays good money. It's because we feel this needs to be done, and we didn't see anyone else doing it, so we jumped into action. But I also, and that might be just explode the the scope of this interview. I do think we can move away from our current form of, extractive form of neoliberal capitalism and work towards a world where it's still capitalism, but of the sense of, trading is capitalism, and we can reinvent that. I strongly believe we are not bound to the system that we have right now, And people will be shocked by it and think I'm talking about some radical form of socialism and Marxism. But I do think there's ways of to transform the system towards working with nature instead of against it.
I completely agree. If everybody looks at human history, capitalism is a tiny, tiny part of what
Yeah,
we've been a part of
yeah,
since we've come into existence. And we created it. It's a concept. We
yeah,
can change it. It
yeah.
doesn't have to be this way. And just because you're born into a system that works a certain way doesn't mean it has to stay that way forever.
Right. Absolutely. I fully agree with you. And basically the form of capitalism we have hasn't really taken that shape since, well, somewhere after the Second World War. And even then it took some time until we got to the point where we are right now. So if you think about like that, it's only one lifetime. So there's still enough time to turn that wheel around. And it's all just an agreement. And if enough people agree that we want to create something else, and that's actually where I get really excited about new technologies that I don't understand at all. But if we go into cryptocurrencies, for example, and that's a whole topic by itself, and that can be problematic as well. But it's if you look at meme coins, for example, it's just a group of people that align on values that decide to we're going to create a new currency and we're going to
Yep.
use that and we're going to trade with it. Imagine if we just all agree we create a currency based on biodiversity and nature, and enough people just buy into it. It is just automatically part of a system.
And it is literally as simple and as complex as that sounds.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
What's one surprising thing you've learned along your journey with the Great Bubble Barrier?
Definitely what we just talked about. I also didn't think I'll. There's so many things now that I'm working on that I would have never thought I'll work on. Um, Definitely one surprising thing is still whatever you do, it's still at the end of the day about people.
Yeah,
You can say the company and the government, it's people, and that again can be frustrating, but it can also be empowering, right? Because you can change people, you can change people's minds towards the better. You can also do it towards the worse. Um, what I learned at the Great Bubble Barrier is, and that's definitely surprising. Not really surprising, but also fulfilling for myself is there is hundreds, thousands of other people like us out there in this world working on maybe the same topic, maybe on a similar topic. And it sometimes feels like, at least for me, that it feels like I'm the only one worried about this
yeah,
or working on this. And it can be lonely sometimes. And you feel like you go mad, or like all your friends don't understand really what you're doing, or just, the hippie that's working on some environmental topic. Um, and throughout our journey and the networks we've been part of, to get to speak to other people from all over the world who have the same, if not more, passion for environmental topics, and that really gives a sense of community and not being alone in this, and that's what makes me believe also that there is still a way to change all of this.
definitely. Who knows? If you're sat there worried about sustainability and you're working on a problem and you think you're all alone, there might be three women sat in a bar looking at a pint of beer and
Right.
coming up with the same solution as
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So, what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember about the Great Bubble Barrier or the fight against plastic pollution?
um about us and what we do, go on the internet and look at what we're doing, and see if it resonates. But all in all, I think, and just what we also just talked about, there's so much bad thing happen like there's so many bad things happening in this world, and it can be so easily demotivating, frustrating, and depressing. um and what I want people to know, that they are not alone, and they the way of getting out of this spiral is, I think, to just start somewhere, and to not be too hard on yourself, that you're not doing everything. And that's often such a frustration, right? If I'm not doing it to 100%, I shouldn't start at all. But then you never get there. If we would look at that with the scale and complexity of the plastic problem, again, we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, because we cannot solve it alone. But we can as a collective, and with more and more people jumping on board. So no matter how little your contribution and your effort is, I want people to know that it matters.
I think that's a wonderful way to end this podcast. So thank you so much for joining me today, Philip. It's been educational and interesting, and also very inspiring too.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking with you. Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the GreenTruth podcast. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and inspiring. Remember, it's through understanding truth in action that we can pave the way for a sustainable future. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe for more thought-provoking conversations, and don't forget to leave us a review. Until next time, stay curious and keep seeking the truth.